Hi everyone, my name is Karina and my Polygence mentor is Yang. My project was to produce a research paper on how the physical environment can influence people's behaviors, specifically the residents of Singapore and Jakarta. As someone who has lived in both places, I found the contrast of the physical space and way of life of the two cities very interesting. Jakarta is known for its traffic and its slums, while Singapore is more known for its cleanliness and its wealth. I wanted to find out more about how the layout and physical elements of the city life influences the city's residents. I divided my paper into three parts: housing and how housing affects mental well-being and community, then how public art affects community, and lastly how landmarks influence patriotism. First, I found that as people moved from slums to public housing and then to private housing, people knew and interacted with their neighbors less. As more than 70% of Singaporeans live in high-rise public housing compared to more than 50% of Jakartans living in the slums, it is more likely that Singaporeans interact with their communities less than Jakartans. In fact, this is cited as one of the reasons why Jakartans living in slums avoid moving to public housing, because of their strong sense of community. This sense of community also manifests itself in the well-being of these Jakartans, as they feel more satisfied with their life despite their socio-economic situation because they are facing their hardships as a community rather than an individual. People living in high-rise buildings are also more likely to feel more isolated and lack privacy due to close proximity. Second, I wanted to find out how public art affects the community. I found that Singapore and Jakarta have different types of public art, where street art and graffiti are more prominent in Jakarta, compared to the sculptures, installations, and murals seen around Singapore. Because public art is regulated by the Singaporean government, Singaporeans need authorization to make murals or street art. The Singaporean government first brought in renowned artists like Liechtenstein and Botero to install artworks around the city to show how globally connected the city is, but realized the Singaporeans don't feel connected to these artworks, and thus started commissioning installations by local artists to celebrate the country's history instead. Jakarta's public art, however, could be seen as more free and public because it is not heavily regulated by the government. Jakartans feel more politically engaged because they are able to express their opinions more freely through art, whereas Singaporeans may feel more socially alienated because they are not as familiar or involved with the art around them. Lastly, I researched on how the types of landmarks the cities have affect how the cities are perceived, and in turn, how it affects the residents' perception and patriotism of their cities. When you think of Singapore, Marina Bay Sands or Gardens by the Bay often come to mind. This is because the city chooses to emphasize these landmarks to show how modern and future-oriented the city is. This view of Singapore also manifests itself in the mindset of the people, as people focus more on economic success and getting things done. On the other hand, Jakarta's landmarks often commemorate the past, such as the Monas representing the struggle for independence. With frequent exposure to these monuments, residents are encouraged to perceive these cities the way they want to be perceived: modern for Singapore and historical or nationalistic for Jakarta. This could also influence the type of patriotism Singaporeans and Jakartans feel, where Singaporeans' patriotism is often motivated by the economic success of the city and being ahead of other nations, whereas Jakartans' patriotism is often rooted in the struggle to get to where they are. The physical environments of these two cities motivate their residents in different ways, as they are exposed to these landmarks or arts installations or housing on a day-to-day basis. With that in mind, it can be seen that the two cities have different types of strengths and can therefore learn from one another on how to maintain a good balance between the physical environment and the behaviors of their residents. For example, Jakarta can learn how to build better infrastructure to house those in slums while still maintaining a strong sense of community, whereas Singapore can learn how to find ways to include the public in the creation of public art more. I hope you learned something new from my project and start questioning about how your own physical environment influences the way you behave and live. Thank you.